Kelly with MomTrainer.com. Today we are going to talk about posture and baby carrying and some things to keep in mind. Posture is something that's massively important when it comes to having a healthy pregnancy and preventing a lot of issues postpartum with the way that we carry lots of heavy things, including grocery bags and dumbbells and tiny people and car seats and heavy diaper bags, especially if you are breastfeeding. For whatever reason, we all just tend to kind of hunch over and end up here, but we actually want to do the complete opposite of that. So today, we're just going to talk a little bit about proper posture and a little bit about the spine and some different carrying positions too. So I want you to stand up for this one and do it along with me. First things first, we're going to connect our feet to the floor because posture kind of starts from the feet. So look down at your toes, and we want to stack the heels underneath the hips here. If one foot kind of steps out, or if one heel's turning out or turning in, sometimes that can be very significant of a little shift within the pelvis that is causing that to happen. So for proper alignment, toes forward, and then just kind of wiggle your toes and rock yourself back and forth, and then just come to a neutral position here. If we kind of tend to back up on the heels and lift the toes, that can put a lot of pressure right onto the low back. Whereas if we're in our toes a lot, all of my emphasis is going to go into my knees. So we want to spread the feet and then just come from a nice neutral standing position here. See if you can wiggle your toes without necessarily digging your heels down into the floor. So that being said, make any adjustments as you need and just take note of them because that's something that you might want to work on in the future. And so again, going up through our kinetic chain, let's talk about the pelvis. There's a couple different positions that the pelvis tends to be in while we're pregnant and postpartum. If you imagine that the pelvis is a bucket of water, so right here, we can either dump the water out the front, dump the water out the back, or be in a neutral position. So this is called an anterior tilt, where your pelvis essentially tilts forward. And you'll notice, not only do I kind of pooch my belly out a little bit, I'm putting a lot of pressure right into my low back. So I'm kind of sticking my butt out, stretching my hamstrings, and putting a lot of work here and right here. Whereas if I kind of have a tuck under position, so if you've taken a bar class, for whatever reason, they'll encourage you to go like that because it's more flattering for the waistline. But what do you see here? It starts to go into my upper back, in my knees, and then I'm not really using any of my glute strength, nor am I using my core. So in an ideal situation, we're not tilting or tucking, we're just keeping the pelvis nice and neutral. So you can kind of take your hands to your hips and play around with a couple tilts and tucks, and then see if you can kind of align your bucket where we're not putting any pressure right in the tailbone. This may encourage you to relax your abdominal muscles as opposed to tucking them in and squeezing, and I would encourage you to do that. To just let your abdominal muscles relax a little bit. If we are constantly sucking in and engaging with the way that the core works, if we're bracing all the time, it's going to put a lot of downward pressure onto our pelvic floor. So if you're having any incontinence issues or prolapse issues, breathe, let it go. You don't always need to be sucking in. So moving up, once we find our proper spinal alignment with our pelvis, we can kind of start talking about the ribs and the thoracic spine. So the spine has four major segments: the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, again like the low back, and then your sacrum, which is your tailbone. For the thoracic spine, if we are kind of hunching forward and rounding the thoracic spine, so two positions here that we'll talk about, kyphosis, lordosis. With that anterior pelvic tilt, lordosis, putting all of that pressure onto the lumbar spine, super unhealthy position to be in. Same with the kyphotic position here. The goal of the spine is to help us walk, stay up straight, but also to support our internal organs. So if you can just imagine what everything underneath my skin is going through if I'm walking around like this and this, it's not great, but more importantly, it's not healthy. So when we're in this position here, imagine stacking your ribs right over your spine. So go ahead and kind of feel around for your rib cage with one hand, and then slide that hand down here and kind of wiggle Another thing too, when we're working with spine stuff, we tend to lock our knees a little bit or overbend. So if you're like trying to find your ideal tucking the ribs under, keeping the ribs on top of the pelvis, notice how your knees are feeling. Sometimes that's an indication that there is a little issue in your low back coming into the pelvis, or if you tend to thrust the ribs forward. I don't know when this happened, but I think in like the yoga craze of the early 2000s, we were telling everyone to draw your shoulders down and back, and instead of saying let go of your shoulders and stack your ribs over your hips, it turned into this. And that rib thrust is gonna put a lot of pressure on my pelvic floor. See how I'm completely out of alignment here, where I'm kind of like sticking my boobs out and putting a lot of pressure on my low back. This is one of the most significant things that can happen during pregnancy, because when we're growing a baby in our bellies, we're here, and then if we're popping our hips out, it's gonna go all right here. And if we're walking around like this for 9 months, and we have a birthing pelvis, if things kind of don't come back together immediately, as happens for most women, it's just putting a ton of pressure on our pelvic floor, which is so important. So if you are pregnant, we want to stay closed in the ribs. Your body's going to make room. You're not going to put a ton of pressure on your back. So even if you feel like this is a position that you want to be in, try to tuck in the ribs over the hips a little bit, and then just soften your knees in your standing position. And again, I do think just finding your proper posture is something we can do when we brush our teeth. Kind of check in, just going and adding that into our daily routine, so it's something we don't have to think about. But it is super important when we're pregnant. So now, after we've had the baby, let's talk about how to carry them around. So obviously, when we're pregnant, we tend to carry most of our weight here, which can put a lot of stress on the low back, especially if you pop the ribs out, expanding here. We do kind of want to knit in, obviously without kind of crouching and tucking under, but again, exhaling to lift the pelvic floor, keeping the core contracted, tucking the ribs in, maintaining this like neutral spinal alignment. And again, it's going to look different for everybody. I am honestly the worst example of perfect posture because I do have an anterior tilt in my spine, so I'm trying my best to like make this look normal. But again, you can kind of feel it out in your own body and feel whether you're tilting or tucking or kind of shifting your hips side to side, starting from the feet. So now, I'm going to talk about picking up babies, or dumbbells, or grocery bags. It's still kind of the same concept. So let's talk about how to pick up your baby. Coming from a widened stance sometimes feels more comfortable. You can also turn your toes out a little bit. We essentially want to tilt the pelvis and then drop down to a squat. So if you notice that you do tend to tuck under, if you're going to go pick something up, you're going to go straight in your knees if you're in this position. So stick your butt out, just like you're doing a squat at the gym to pick up an object. Do it with your tiny human. So if you have a tiny human, you can use them to practice for this video. You can also just grab a dumbbell or a loaded grocery bag just to kind of practice. But I do like to say, stick your butt out, just like you're sitting into a chair. Drop your shoulders, keep your elbows kind of tight in as much as you can. Because if I'm out here lifting something up, it's going to be a lot more challenging for my shoulders and my back than if I'm picking something up from here. The closer we are the closer the object is to our body, the easier it is to pick up. So keep that in mind, especially as your tiny human grows into a bigger human. You ready? You'll be in the video. Yeah, you do. Okay. So, kind of come down into a squat position. Bring your baby as close to you as you can. Come into your heels, and then exhale as you come up. Same thing as you would for a squat. Now, we all tend to carry our babies here or here, but the more we can keep them in towards our midline, which is right, the imaginary line that kind of divides us into halves, the happier that will be. And again, if we think about it's more challenging to bring the baby away, you want to keep them in nice and tight. And again, imagine stacking your ribs over your pelvis, and staying neutral in the feet here. Now I know, as a a mom of two, that standing still is not something that often happens. So we tend to kind of rock, and we tend to get tired, and we tend to lean back a little bit to support their weight. But we actually don't want to do that. If you can bend your knees a little bit, just to kind of bounce side to side to mix it up, sometimes that will feel more comfortable. And I think also too, when it comes to our shoulder sockets, our shoulders are the most mobile joint, one of the most mobile joints in the body, and therefore more prone to injury. So if I'm here holding in these kind of carrying positions, I'm like out of alignment in my shoulders. So you want to root the shoulders back into the socket. If you've ever taken my Pilates or postpartum or prenatal classes, you'll hear me say things like stay in your socket. And the reason why is if we're out of the shoulder socket, if we're like rounding forward, you'll feel how that joint is kind of out of its socket if we're like rounding forward. So we want to imagine that your shoulder is a catcher's mitt. You want to grip the ball as much as you can, especially when you're picking up a baby or an object. So if I'm here, it's going to put a lot more strain on my shoulder than if my shoulders are down, gripping down into the socket. And then another thing to think about too is we tend to like chicken the neck out. So this is a common one where we jut the chin out. This is another one where we tend to like have our heads tilted forward. So just kind of shake your head out here and imagine just stacking your head on top of your spine. This is really helpful to do in front of a mirror, or if you can have someone take a picture or film you while you kind of shake your head out to find your neutral head position. It's really helpful to actually see it. So if you can actually film yourself in these positions, going to squat down to pick up your baby, the carrying position, kind of notice, I mean, I know, like, honestly, like, I have my own issues with posture for sure. I definitely tend to pop my hip out as opposed to staying in, like, the neutral position. So I have to constantly remind myself not to tilt my hip back and lean back or kind of round into her. It's something that, you know, it's a journey for everybody. And for example, like my son is 2, so I carry him very differently than I do her now because he is very wiggly. Another thing to keep in mind is breastfeeding positions here too. Try to use a boppy pillow or a nursing pillow, or just bolster or support yourself as much as you can. You want to essentially lift them up onto you as opposed to rounding down to them. And I know sometimes in the middle of the night when you're so exhausted and you will do literally anything to stretch your shoulders, you will want to come here. That's obviously not a very happy position for my neck or my shoulders, and we can do a lot of damage. So as much support as you can to bolster them to you, and you can kind of lean back a little bit. That's another thing to think about, because we do tend to instinctively as moms, when we're carrying our children, whether in a car seat or pushing a stroller or just kind of walking them around, automatically we're going to be like subconsciously gripping in the shoulders and lifting. So the more you can think, dropping your shoulders, staying nice and strong, maintaining a neutral pelvis position, making sure your feet feel nice and even, and that you're not popping or tucking the ribs under, the happier your spine will be. And just a couple things to think about. Oh, hi. So that's it. If you have any questions on this, please feel free to reach out. But again, I am a teacher. I am not a physical therapist. So if this is something that you're really having issues with, please call someone who is a licensed professional and can kind of go in and do some physical therapy, which is something that we need a lot as moms, especially as our kids grow and our bodies, you know, recover or don't recover after having a baby. But yeah, tell me how this feels. I look forward to hearing from you.